Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Drigget Arts. With me today are co-host Tom McGarry, author Katherine Howe, and ASL interpreter Gay. Katherine is a New York Times best-selling and award-winning novelist and historian. Her most recent books are Astor, The Rise and Fall of the American Fortune, co-authored with CNN's Anderson Cooper. The novel A True Account, Hannah, Masury's Sojourners Amongst the Pyrates, written by herself, and the Penguin Books of Pyrates, an edited volume from Penguin Classics. She holds degrees from Columbia, Boston University, and the University of East Anglia, and is a fellow at the Society of American Historians. She lives in Baltimore and New England, where she is at work on her next novel, which sounds exciting and intriguing.
Thank you.
Sure. How did you get intrigued with pirates to do all this, Katherine?
Oh gosh. Well, so I only have one hobby. I don't knit. I can't cook. I have no craft skills whatsoever. My only hobby is I'm a sailor.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I started sailing with my family on the Gulf Coast of Texas when I was small, not in any kind of serious way, but as a family excursion. And then didn't do it for a long time until my husband and I moved to Marblehead, Massachusetts, really on a whim during graduate school, because we realized that there was no law that said we had to live in Somerville just because we were in grad school. And so we decided that we loved the North Shore, and we had somebody in control of our schedules. And when we first arrived to look at a listing, or like a rental listing from Craigslist in Marblehead, in Old Town Marblehead, it felt like stepping out of the car and into a fairyland, like
Mm.
as if like little birds were tying ribbons over the door, and it was just like completely magical. And so we moved to Marblehead, and having no understanding of Marblehead's past, its culture, any of that, Marblehead is a big sailing town,
Mhm.
as I'm sure everybody except me knew.
Oh,
And so I and so when I first started looking at the harbor full of all these sailboats, I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't been sailing in so long. How do I get into this? How can I start sailing? And someone told me all I had to do was list myself on the crew bank at the Boston Yacht Club. And so I was snapped up by a boat, and that was in 2006.
oh, wow.
And in that time, so I have been in racing crews in Marblehead for 20 years, and for about 10 years have had the sailboat that I sailed on as a child, that had belonged to my grandfather. It was in at the Houston Yacht Club for a long time, and then it went to live with my uncle in Austin on a lake for a long time, and then it went to live with me in upstate New York for a little bit, and then now it lives in Salem. It's a very well-traveled little boat. And so that's my only hobby is sailing.
Oh,
And
wow.
one thing that was interesting to me, so like any sailor or person who's oriented to the sea, I am obsessed with pirates and stories of, heroic and exciting stories from the age of sail. But another aspect of pirates was really interesting to me as someone who'd written a lot about the Salem witch trials. Because my first novel, The Physic Book of Deliverance Dane, came about because I was living in Marblehead, which is right next door to Salem.
Sure.
And because I felt like I had not seen a magical realist approach to the Salem story, I felt like I'd either seen skeptical accounts that were very condescending to historical actors, or I'd seen fantasy accounts that were very fun and fantastical, and that's fine. But I felt like I hadn't seen a version of the Salem story that took the colonial European perspective on witchcraft seriously. So my first novel came about from that thought experiment. But another thing that I noticed when I started researching pirates and started thinking about pirates was that one of the reasons that witches were a challenge to the power structure. Uh,
Yes.
they were a challenge to the power structure. They represented a challenge to ecclesiastical authority. It was a very gendered power because, as you know, most people who were tried as witches in the early modern period were women. They were mostly middle or working class women, for that matter, too. So there was a class challenge, power challenge happening on that scale as well. One thing that I noticed while I was starting to research piracy is that the so-called golden age of piracy, which extends broadly from the beginning of the 1600s into the beginning, or 1726 is usually when it's considered to end. It's the same period of time as the biggest peak of witch hunts in Europe and in North America. And
Wow.
that's partly because pirates are also a challenge to the power structure. They represent lawlessness and anarchy. They represent economic chaos. And most of the people who are tried as pirates are men, and most of them are working class men. And interestingly, Cotton Mather, the guy who we all know from his writing and his overseeing of the Salem witch trials, also wrote extensively and preached extensively against pirates and piracy.
Huh.
And so I was very moved by the fact that here I felt like pirate stories were kind of the other side of the coin of early modern regular people, because witch trials and pirate trials are also an example of moments when regular people who would often otherwise escape historical notice completely are instead at the very center of the drama. Regular people's words are written down with more attention. The details of their lives are recorded and preserved. And so it's unusual in that regard as well. And so the story in A True Account begins in Boston in 1726 at a real pirate trial that happened in Boston in 1726. I have a fictional character watch the trial and the execution happen. And then that is kind of the inciting event that invites her, Hannah Masury is her name, on to the pirate quest that she ends up going on. But it was really about my interest in witches and my interest in pirates are actually very closely aligned.
Well, I had no idea that those two things went hand in hand.
I didn't either until I started doing the research for it and started thinking about it in a more systematic way.
Yeah. Wow.
That was one of the major arguments that I made in my dissertation at the University of East Anglia.
Oh my.
Last year, in fact.
Uh, but where is that university?
It is in Norwich, UK.
Ah,
And the reason this came about was because I started writing fiction while in a doctoral program in American Studies at Boston University. And I was teaching a lot, and most of my work at that time was around American visual culture, which is like interdisciplinary art history. And I was TAing at BU, and I picked up some TA work at Harvard as well. And so I was working very hard, and then I kept kind of hitting a wall with my dissertation and having the dissertation just like ideas. I would propose ideas and they'd get batted down. And it was one of those things where I kept just butting my head against the wall. And instead I had an idea. I had the idea for my first novel. And someone had put me in touch with a literary agent who was really encouraging of this idea. So it was one of these it was like a sign from the universe. Like, it turns out this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But so I left BU ABD, which stands for all but dissertation. But it always kind of hung over my head that I had never finished. It was like the great thing I've done. And it turns out, so there's a marvelous book called Albion's Seed, which traces the different cultural origins of the East Coast colonies in the different regions of what is now the United Kingdom that settled those different regions. So the reason that the North Shore, for instance, has a slightly different culture, slightly, from Plymouth, which has a different culture from Virginia, is partly due to the economic underpinnings of those colonial projects, but also due to the cultural origin points of where those populations came from. And the cultural origin point that settled the North Shore in Essex County, Massachusetts, is East Anglia, which is the eastern region of the United Kingdom. And so the school at the University of East Anglia has always had an American Studies program, partly because there is this they've had an American Studies program for ages that's very well regarded, which I had known about when I was a graduate student. And also in the UK, you can, if you have a lot of scholarship behind you, you can apply to finish your doctorate by writing a substantial thesis about that puts the work that you've already done in a broader context. And so a colleague of mine at Colgate told me that there was such a thing as a PhD by publication. And I approached a couple of scholars at the University of East Anglia in the American Studies program saying, hey, you don't know me from Adam, but here's my story and here's what I'm doing. And how would you feel about taking me on as a postgraduate researcher, which is what they
Wow.
call graduate students? And long story short, it took me just about 2 years, a year and a half, and I defended and received my doctorate at long last.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah, congratulations.
That is great. Congratulations on that. It's nice that it was able to end that
Summer,
way too.
24 years after I started graduate studies.
Wow.
Uh, that's just amazing.
It's really lovely, and I'm very grateful to UEA for
You seem to be frozen, Catherine. Are you frozen for everybody?
Yes, for me.
Hmm. And we can't hear you talking anymore. I don't know if you can see us.
I can. I
Okay.
can see
You're
you.
back. I see you
Okay.
moving and I hear you talking.
Sorry about that.
That's all
Mm,
right. It's life.
yeah, like on the internet.
Right, At least the roof isn't falling in and we're not getting flooded out, right? We're all fine.
The roof is not falling in. Let me see if I can change my network connection because I think my network connection is acting up.
Mm.
Let's see.
I always
That's
get nervous when we're going to do these things and there's a company truck going around the neighborhood. Like, uh-oh.
Oh, I know. Here, let me see if I can change to my hotspot. Can you just give me a moment?
Oh, yeah,
Sure.
we are. We're just
Yeah.
waiting.
Here's my hotspot. Okay, that should be better.
Yep, you're back and I see you.
Great.
Thank you.
My apologies.
Yeah,
No,
you
that's all right.
mentioned a couple
But
things. So, on the subject of pirates, I think you know
mhm,
much more than I do, but I've read there were actually some female pirate captains, and
very
secondly,
few.
that each
Yeah.
each ship was essentially very democratic. So, do I have
That's
that right? And could you comment a little bit if either way?
you you definitely do have that right. There is some evidence that there were some women who were pirates,
Mm,
often in disguise.
mm,
And that's where the origin story for my pirate character in a true account comes from, because she initially
ah,
has to disguise herself
Yes.
as a boy in order to keep herself safe.
mm,
However, one of the things that's so fascinating to me about pirates and piracy is that even during the golden age of piracy, even while these guys were still alive, they were undergoing a process of mythologizing.
mm,
And so, in fact, one of the most commonly sourced and widely read and still in print primary sources about pirates in the Golden Age is called A General History of the Pirates. And the
mm,
general history, while based in fact, is also written in a very literary, like over the top
uh,
kind of. And in fact, scholars for a long time thought that it might have been secretly authored by Daniel Defoe. It was not. It turns out there's some pretty compelling evidence that it was written by a guy who's a newspaper printer. And so he was working from oral histories and from stories that had been printed in broadsides in the 17th and into the beginning of the 18th century. But they were definitely the book was published to be sensational. And so it's very much
ah,
in dialogue with pirate fictions, like the pirate fictions that were written by Daniel Defoe and that were very popular at that time. So the nature of pirate stories and pirate history, from my perspective, is kind
mm,
of inextricably bound up with myth and mythologizing. That being said, there are examples of two women pirates that are discussed in A General History, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who somehow ended up both in disguise. Although Anne Bonny's disguise is kind of in heavy quotes, Mary Read was more disguised. In the same crew of a guy named Calico Jack Rackham, which has a great, best pirate name ever. They
yes.
were they were captured off of Jamaica in the I want to say 17 teens.
Mm.
And supposedly it was Anne and Mary who were holding the deck of the ship, and they were so mad that the guys that their crewmates were like taking shelter down below that they fired down in the companionway because they were so
Oh,
mad.
oh,
And then reportedly, when everyone was captured and put in prison, both Anne and Mary were pregnant. And so
oh, wow.
just like pregnant women who were tried and condemned as witches, they were not going to be put to death right away because they were going to have their babies first.
Oh,
And so reportedly, Bonnie, was allowed to go see Calico Jack in prison because she had been Calico Jack's lover.
oh,
He was apparently bemoaning his fate and feeling sorry for himself. And she says the best thing. She says she's sorry to see it, but if he'd only fought like a man, he would have had to die like a dog.
whoa.
Oh, harsh. But one of the things that is also compelling about piracy is that historian Marcus Rediker has made the point um, that pirate ships were organized in a surprisingly democratic way.
Mm,
That's because oftentimes a ship turned to piracy as a result of a mutiny.
mm,
So the guy who opens the action in my novel, A True Account, is a guy named William Fly, and he only became a pirate captain because he led a mutiny. Because they were on a ship called the Elizabeth, and they were subject to what William Fly called hard usage. And so they murdered the captain and threw the first mate overboard, and using force took over the ship. There is an example of articles to which a pirate crew would sign themselves onto, which determined the sharing of spoils. It often determined there was even payout if you got injured or wounded, if you lost a limb,
wow.
things like that, which for the early modern period is a really kind of liberating idea.
Yeah.
There's some historians who've tried to point to the organization on pirate ships as an origin idea for democracy,
Yeah.
which I think might oversell it a bit. I think instead it is more about how do you get buy-in from people when there's no organic system of oppression in place.
Mm,
Um, and so, but maybe that's all democracy is, really.
mm, mm.
I'm cynical these days, slightly
Yeah.
cynical.
Yeah.
But the articles did point out that the captain was the captain by popular acclaim. That means that the captaincy could be taken away by
Yeah.
popular acclaim. And different ships had different policies on, for instance, having women aboard, which could be seen as causing infighting, and things like that. So yeah, you are correct that a pirate ship was one of the few places in the early modern period where a working person, an unmoneyed person, might have some modicum of control over the outcome of his life, but not much, and only for a short time because piracy was punishable by death.
Yeah.
Calico Jack was hanged, and then he was gibbeted on a tiny rock called Rackham's Cay,
Oh,
right outside of Jamaica.
wow.
Yeah, but I mean, not all the jobs that people had were long-lived jobs either. A lot of them.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing, nothing will make you less romantic about the past than studying it, I think.
Oh, wow.
Um, at
Yeah.
least that's been my experience. Every once in a while in an interview, I'm asked what time period would I most want to live in? And the answer is always either like right this minute or maybe 5 years from now, like
Oh,
depending on
yeah.
what your perspective.
Yeah.
Living in the past was hard. It was hard. Living in the earth was hard.
Yeah. I mean, medicine, communication,
Mhm.
traffic, pollution. I mean, there was
Every
always
day that I take a Every day that I take a warm shower
Oh,
indoors with potable water, I am grateful to live in the present because that is something that we take totally for granted has been available to America, maybe two.
I like to tell our kids we're rich because we have enough to eat
Mhm.
and we
Yeah,
have a warm, dry place to sleep.
I thought,
exactly.
Tom, you were going to
Exactly. I
say,
think that's a worthy thing.
yeah, what some grandmother said a long time ago. Now so we're 70, and I think this was when we were in our 40s or 30s. Some older
Yeah.
woman um, who would have been my age or now or older, was asked, "What's the most modern convenience that you really like?" And people were thinking she'd say a microwave or whatever. And she said, "Indoor plumbing."
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, early on, there's a scene in my first novel, Physic Book, where I have a character distracted by the fact that he has an ingrown toenail.
Oh,
And it's because I was thinking about the fact that, like, all these tiny little inconveniences
Yeah,
that we don't even notice could actually be like, you could die from having had an ingrown
right.
toenail if because there's no antibiotics, because there's, like, that's something that I think about a fair amount.
Yeah. And there are places in the world where people can die from that because there isn't enough medicine there.
Exactly.
It's a lot we take for granted in this country.
It really is. It really is.
So I should ask you how you got into writing and then also to tell us a little bit about sneak preview on your next novel.
Oh, I'd happily give you a sneak preview. I mean, I'd always written as a child. It was just something that I very early on learned, if ever I was feeling out of sorts, sitting down and writing was the way that I would put myself back in order. But it never occurred to me that creative writing could be a career. It just seemed like beyond the pale. It was just not something I ever imagined. And so I didn't study it in college. I didn't approach it from a professionalizing perspective. I didn't go to an MFA program. I thought that the way to write as part of my profession would be to be an academic, which is why I was initially studying to be a professor. And I discovered that in graduate school, like, it was sort of a situation where I couldn't do anything else. Like, it was just like, clearly this is where my skill set lies. Um, but also and I think for a lot of writers, especially for a first novel, first novels typically result from some very deep compulsion that you just need to do, because there's never any guarantee that you can
No.
finish it, that anyone will read it, that anyone will publish it, that you have any idea what you're doing. And so there's always an element of risk, like a big element of risk in writing a first novel,
Mm.
particularly because it's something one hasn't done before. And so when I was starting to think about the story in Physic Book of Deliver and Stain, this might amuse you, I was like, well, heck, I don't know how to write a novel. Novels are really long. How do I do that? And so I made a spreadsheet and I put the numbers 1 through 20 on the top.
mm,
And then I put my characters down the side. And then I slotted in who I thought would be doing what when.
Oh,
Because I
yeah.
thought, oh,
yeah.
well, I can write a 20-page paper, no problem. So how long
Oh,
is a novel? Call it 40 pages, call it 400 pages. So if I do 20 chapters, 20 pages each, that's a whole novel.
yeah.
And so I slotted in who's doing what and what do we know when. And I made a great big spreadsheet. And this is still the method that I'm doing. In fact,
Wow.
yesterday I made fantastic progress on the spreadsheet for my new novel. I'm really excited.
That's
Although
great.
whenever I tell people that I use a spreadsheet, that I use Excel, you can always see people's faces fall because it's just like so unromantic. It's so unliterary seeming. And
It
I
makes
always
perfect
joke that,
sense to me, though. And
Yeah.
I think,
yeah.
because you have this grand plan and you have to get there. It's like, how do you build a house? Well, you need plans. You need to know
Well,
where the
some
plumbing is.
authors don't take that approach, though. There
Yeah.
are some, it's kind of a canard, but it is
Mm,
widely thought that there are two kinds of novelists: plotters, I'm a
mm,
plotter, and
mm,
pantsers.
mm,
And my friend Julia Glass, for example, is a pantser. She
mm.
gets kind of her probably best known book is Three Junes. She's also an
Yeah.
author in Marblehead.
Right.
And she tends to have a much more organic relationship with her fiction, which is why her fiction has a lot of memory and flashback and movement back and forth in perspective and in time. And it's because she is writing her way into what the characters are doing.
Mm,
Whereas I am more of a schematic worker, I guess. I
mm,
tend to get interested in a moment in time for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And then I because I pretty much exclusively write historical fiction, I spend a lot of time researching that time period and focusing on that time period and being very steeped in the material world of it and the visual culture of that world and the politics and all of that. And then I try to come up with who I think are people or characters who plausibly belong in that world.
Yeah.
And then only after that happens do I understand what the plot is going to be. And
Yeah.
Because I don't know what will happen until I know how they're going to interact. And so
Right.
I spend a lot of time prep. I spend a lot of writing time is actually prep time. And in fact, you're coming upon me at pretty much the exact moment when I'm just about to move from this like long time prep time. I've been thinking about and planning this novel for about a year already.
Wow.
Wow.
And I'm just about to get to the drafting time.
Mm.
So the actual drafting time is often very short. Like there'll be prep will be this long, drafting will be this long, revision will be this long.
Oh.
Which is why I never know how to answer when people say, how long does it take you to write a novel? I'm like, I don't know. 1 to 3 years. Like it depends on how you define writing.
Right.
Really.
Right. Because all that research goes into the writing as well.
Yeah, exactly.
All the
Our
plotting.
daughter is a creative writer and she's a plotter, not a
Pantser.
did you say prancer or pantser?
Pantser, like by the seat of your pants.
Okay,
Right.
a pantser. Got it.
Pantser.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody has their own approach. In fact, I was surprised to discover I came upon somewhere along the line years ago that apparently J.K. Rowling also used a grid when she started plotting out when she first started plotting out Harry Potter, which I had not known. But it really looked quite a lot like what I had done for my own work. And so I was very surprised to discover that I'd reinvented the wheel.
Well, but it's your wheel.
Yeah, or found the tool that works for you.
I invented my own wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the project that I'm working on right now, I'm calling Bonfire. I don't know if that title is going to last. I have my titles either wax very long and verbose, or quite short. I have one other novel title that is only one word, which is Conversion, and that was its working title as well. And I was surprised that it lasted. So who knows if Bonfire will stay the title, but that's what it's called now. And I'm conceiving it as a backdating and updating of Bonfire of the Vanities.
Oh,
wow.
Set in the 1890s instead of the 1980s.
Wow.
So it's going to be a Gilded Age novel with kind of conflict and interaction between classes. And it's going to start with a crime. And that crime, which as the original Bonfire of the Vanities begins with a crime, and then it's sort of the unraveling of a privileged New Yorker's life in the aftermath of this crime. And so I'm starting from that conceit, and it is inspired by a real crime that happened that involved a prominent family. But I'm doing something different for me, which is usually I will write a historical fiction book that has a few real people in it, and then fictional or fictionalized people interacting with the real people. So in A True Account, William Fly is a real guy. Ned Lowe, who's the pirate that my main character ends up shipping out with, he was a real person also, who also was based in Boston. And many of the things that happen in A True Account are things that I took from the historical record. So
it was very fun to read.
I had a few readers be like, wow, this book is so violent. Like, I don't understand. Why is this book so violent? And when I first heard that, I was like, it can't be violent. I'm a big softie. I'm vegetarian for 30 years. Like, I'm like, I don't write violent stuff. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, there's a hanging, and then there's a mutiny, and then cut the guy's hands off. And then and when I started tallying it up, I was like, oh wow, it is a really violent book. But in my defense, none of the violence came from my imagination. It came from the historical record. But in this case, with Bonfire, I'm actually taking a page from Edith Wharton. Edith Wharton fictionalized everyone in her fiction. And oftentimes you could trace kind of an inspiration or an origin. You could draw a credible hypothesis for who this person was inspired by, but she did not have real people and fictional people interacting. She fictionalized everybody. And so this is I've always wanted to be Edith Wharton when I grew up.
So now you get to be it.
I don't know if I'm going to actually get to be Edith Wharton, but I am borrowing that method of hers where I'm going to fictionalize everyone and I think in many instances it will be clear who the inspiration is, but not in every single instance.
That'll be interesting to see. What a cool experiment.
I know. I'm excited. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
It's my absolute pleasure. I had a great time. Thank you. And I just want to mention for anyone who's watching who wants to keep up with me, I have a Substack called The How and the Why, Notes from a Specialist in Witchcraft, Scrying, Ghosts, and Piracy. I don't publish too often, but it's usually remarks having to do with writing or having to do with history, or sometimes slightly more personal writing. But I promise I only publish when I actually have something to say. And it also includes, links to if I have an appearance coming up or anything like that. I'm also findable on Instagram and on Facebook. And if anyone also wants to find me directly, my website is katherinehowe.com.
Great. Thank you so much for all that information. So if you'd like to hear more of her works, please join us for her reading and Q&A during our March Art Saturday. You can register on our website. That's drakeatarts.com. You can also purchase her books through our bookshop. And here you see it. That's bookshop.org/shop/drakeatarts. We'd also like to thank our generous donors for making this program possible. This and all of our programs, actually. Please thank them. If you'd like to become a donor, please go to our website, drakeatarts.com/donate. If you have any questions about our programs and for more information on our Art Saturdays, it's at our website, or you can email us at drakeatarts@gmail.com. This and all our programs are archived on the Drake at Arts YouTube channel, youtube.com/@drakeatarts. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me.